Hello and welcome to lunchtime on Wednesday and to our next Facebook Live as part of the Active Mums Project. If you want to catch up with the previous weeks, you can have a look on our Facebook page, and the links and the videos are all still there, so you can go and have a look about what we've talked about so far. This week, we're going to talk a bit about how to breastfeed and what to expect over the first few days. So last week we talked about how breasts work. We talked about breast milk a bit, what is it, what it does, that kind of thing. We talked about the power of skin to skin contact and the instinctive behaviours that babies show after birth. So this week, one of the things we're going to look at is how we can use those instinctive behaviours to make breastfeeding easier and get it off to a really, really good start. So I think we'll crack on with that straight away. So, let me just grab my baby. All right. So we know that the baby is going to go through these instinctive behaviours, the crawling, the searching for the breast. And we also know that they are primed to attach themselves. So we don't actually have to interfere with this process at all. Our job is simply to support them with what they're trying to do and help them along a little bit, really. And I think this approach we tend to call a baby-led approach because the baby is in control of what's going on, as opposed to some of the other positioning, which we'll talk about in a bit, which is more of a mother-led approach, where the mother is in charge of the position and the attachment. So in this baby-led approach, it really reduces the pressure on you. You're not responsible for getting the baby to the right place. You're not responsible for the timing of when they go on. If it's not quite right, the baby will come off, have a bit of a wriggle and attach themselves back on again. So it is a really good starting position and also a very useful position if you're struggling or having any issues. It can be used right from the word go, and it can be used all the way through your infant's life. So even when they're an older infant, an older baby or a toddler, you can still be using these kind of positions. So I think it's one of my top tips as an IBCLC is this position. If you can crack this, then you're off to a really good start. All right, so how do you actually do it? Well, first of all, you need to think about getting yourself in a good position. Okay, so we talk about position yourself first. So let me just adjust. I'm just going to adjust my camera down a little bit so you can see a bit better. Okay, so when we talk about adjusting yourself, what we want is a bit of a recline to your body. You don't have to be lying down. You can do it in I'm doing it in a really upright chair. And I work with people in breastfeeding groups and things in really upright chairs, and we can still do this position. But we do need a bit of a recline so that gravity is holding you nice and closely together. So you either get yourself snuggled into the corner of a sofa, or if you're on an upright chair, you just bring your bum further forward on the chair, and you can see you can get a nice angle there, so when my baby on me, theoretically, so I suggest the first thing you do is have a nice snuggle. Just smell the baby, have a bit of eye contact, talk to them, because that oxytocin that we talked about last week, remember, that bonding hormone is also the hormone that helps to get the milk flowing from the breast. So just spend a minute just to take a breath, relax, and getting comfortable. Okay, so we've positioned ourselves. We should be comfortable. We shouldn't feel like we're having to hold ourselves up or anything like that. The more cushions around you, the better, but I appreciate that's not going to be the case in the middle of Asda. So you just do the best with what you've got. So position yourself, then position your baby. It depends on your baby, and it depends the stage that they're at. The first time you do this, you might need to give them a little bit of a chance to explore your body a bit more. As they get used to feeding, they'll probably just go straight, and you'll know instinctively the kind of position to help them into. But sometimes just on your chest is a good place to start if you're a bit unsure. So we're having a snuggle, And if the baby's hungry and if the breast is available, they might start to have a bit of a play and a feel. Again, it's one of those instinctive behaviours, isn't it? They're exploring and familiarising themselves with the area, realising that that's where the breast is. And you might see them start to do a bit of bobbing, or they might really push right up and bring their heads right off your body. Even when they're brand new, they can lift their heads right off your body and start to bring themselves over to the breast. And then they'll attach. And it's kind of like cheating, isn't it? It feels like it should be much more complicated than that. But in a baby-led position, that's quite often all there is to it. If you allow the baby the time and the space to sort themselves out, they're more than capable of feeding from you. So you can see that when I'm feeding from this breast, I've kind of got the same arm just around the baby's bum here. And I'm just helping the baby to feel really secure against my body. Some babies quite like to have their legs up in a bit of a sort of a frog leggy or an M shape. And some babies like to have a hand underneath their feet, so they feel like they've got something to push against. Other babies prefer you to hold their bums, and they're happy to just dig their feet into you if they need to shuffle. All right, so I've got my hand around supporting. The arms are against my body, so that if the baby does need to adjust at all, they're free to push up, wiggle a bit, get themselves into a better place. The babies know what kind of milk flow they need and they like. If it's not coming fast enough for them, then they'll come off and they'll have a bit of a wriggle. They might use their hand and give you a bit of a massage to help that along. You looking at the baby, and this position is great for getting a bit of eye contact while you're feeding it. Oh, gives you such a moment sometimes. But you can get this lovely eye contact between you. And it's no coincidence that in the early stages, when they can't see very far, the distance they can see is roughly the distance from there to my face. So they can see you and they're learning who you are. And that bonding between you will help the brain development in the baby and also the milk to flow. It's just all beautifully connected, isn't it? You can see that I've got this baby in quite an upright position, but that might not work for everybody. You need to look at when you're in this kind of laid back-ish position, where is your nipple? When it's out of a bra, preferably, because that's what you're going to be in the first place. Get rid of the bras to start with. Other than between feeds, if you're holding on, you're holding a breast pad or something like that. When you're trying to feed, they just get in the way. So yeah, have a look at where your nipple is, because if it's quite pointing out to the side, then that might involve a slightly different position to if it's very much on top or if it's quite underneath and pointing down into your body. So one position isn't going to work for everybody, but this gives us 360 degrees to work at. So it could be quite straight up. I could go for a much more across my body position, but you can still see that gravity is holding us really closely together. I can let go, theoretically, and the baby's nice and secure against me. Gravity is helping the baby stay on the breast. It's keeping the breast secure in the baby's mouth, so they're less likely to want to clamp on to keep it secure. So I can go for that kind of direction. If I'm very sensitive here and, if I had a section or something like that, or depending on where your nipple is, if you wanted to, you could always come down from this angle, or even this way as well. So loads of different options. If you've got quite a sideways pointing or a top facing nipple, then possibly coming up and over the top. But again, the baby is on top of the breast, on top of the nipple, and staying really secure against me. So this is what we call the baby-led, as I said, the baby-led positioning. And it's the way that we've evolved to feed. We are tummy feeders. And last week we talked a little bit about how the baby's a bit like a turtle. So if you have a baby on its back or a turtle on its back, can't really do very much. It's totally reliant on you. Same if the baby's on its side, very much reliant on you, can't do anything. As soon as you pop that turtle or that baby on its front, it's good to go. It can go where it wants to. And it's very similar with the baby and the feeding. So in these positions with the baby's tummy down, they can help out. They can get themselves to where they want to be. Whereas in what we call the more mother-led positions, like this one, what we call a cross-cradle position like this one, you can see the baby's a lot more on its side. So we are in charge then of getting it to the right place. And that's basically the difference between the two. So definitely recommend having a look at the baby-led positioning. I'll pop a link on underneath to some really good resources, some videos you can watch. The videos will show you it being used with real babies actually latching on, which is much easier to watch. And it shows you with different women, with different body types, and in different kinds of chairs and different situations. So yeah, definitely recommend having a watch at that so you can see how it works. But what about the mother-led positions? They've got their place. I do use them. Like I said, I find the baby-led ones very good for problem solving, but sometimes you've got to have as many tools as possible in your toolbox, don't you? So what are we looking for in order to help the baby to latch on then? Well, the mnemonic that we tend to use is chins to kind of help us remember some of the key points to it. So chins, so C is for close. We want the baby to be close to us, exactly the same as before. So really wrapped around our body. Doesn't matter where it is, it wants to be really wrapped around your body, not kind of out here somewhere and trying to get the breast. So it's sometimes worth, particularly with quite small babies, stripping them down to a vest or preferably skin to skin. Just to kind of reduce the layers. Some babies, especially in the winter, get all kind of piled up with cardigans and all sorts on them to keep them warm and cozy, but that can bring them quite a long way away from your body, and that really changes the angle that they're attaching at. So yeah, make sure that there's not too much bulk between you so you can get that baby nice and not with a reversed head, nice and closely wrapped around your body. So C for close. H is for head free to tilt back. Really important, and I think it's probably the number one thing that I see when I go to visit people. I think the only thing that, if you're a novice with babies, the only thing you're going to know is that you have to protect the baby's head. Was certainly the only thing I ever knew. It was the only thing I got told. When you're feeding, holding onto the baby's head is one of the worst things you can do, unfortunately. Try it yourself. If you have a drink and get someone to force your head downwards, it's really, really hard to take a drink. And it's similar for the babies. When we drink, we want to tip our heads back, open up the esophagus so that it can flow down nicely. So we want the baby free to tip its head back so it can take a really good mouthful of breast. But we do need to protect that delicate neck area and make sure, give them a little bit of support. So I tend to kind of look at having your hand in a bit of a C shape and coming round almost underneath or behind the ears. And that way I can hold it up. Again, don't do this with a live baby, but I can hold it up with one hand here. And this is a weighted doll, so yeah, there's a little bit of a reality there. But so there you can see that I'm giving a bit of extra support to the neck and the shoulders and then down the back. But it's still free to tilt the head back. I haven't got a sneaky finger coming round. I'm not holding on and forcing the baby onto the breast. So head free to tilt back. I, in a straight line. It's very hard again to drink over your shoulder like this. Very similar with the baby. We don't want them lying on something and having to turn their heads into the breast. So try and keep them in a straight line, regardless of what angle you're coming from. They should be in a nice straight line. The fourth one, N, is one of my personal favorites. N for nipple up the nose. When you have the baby, if you put that nipple right next to its mouth, the baby will just kind of go and take a very small mouthful of breast. They'll probably just go onto the nipple a little bit. What we want is a very deep attachment, a lot of breast tissue in there, and much more comfortable and much more effective at massaging the right place on the breast to get that milk flowing more easily. Also, if they're on the nipple, they're probably squashing the nipple. And remember, that's where those tubes that the milk flows through come out of. So if we're squashing that area, the milk flow is not going to be very good. So we want away from the nipple, a nice mouthful of breast. So we don't want them just to be able to go and take a tiny mouthful. We want to really make them reach for it. So we try and angle it so that that nipple is sticking literally up the baby's nose. Really honestly here. And you think there's no way they can get that. But when you do that and you kind of tease them a little bit, they start by kind of going, and then maybe the second or third time you do it, they kind of start going, and they'll really tilt their head back. It helps the chin to contact the breast first, which triggers a wide open mouth. So, and then we can flick in. And the result of that will be a nice, what we call an asymmetric latch. So we don't want the nipple in the middle of the mouth. We want it pointing up to the roof of the mouth and as far back as we can get it. So a really good asymmetric latch. So we might be able to see some of that areola peeking out over the top. We shouldn't be able to see it peeking out at the bottom. With most babies, if they're well attached, the chin's really nicely indented into the breast and the nose is nice and free at the top. So that they're the kinds of things that we'd be looking for. And so yeah, no nipple up the nose, not into the mouth. You can see that if it's going into the mouth, it's pointing at the back of my head. If it's going up the nose, it's pointing more at the roof. So we're going to get it in a better place, and the milk will flow more easily and be more comfortable for you. And then the S is swift. So once you've got your baby in the right place with its head back and the nipple pointing at the roof of the mouth, boom, when that mouth is really wide as it will go, like a big yawn, not just, we want, big yawn, boom, bring the baby onto the breast. And we bring the baby to the breast. We don't bring the breast to the baby because you'll end up really uncomfortable. You can imagine kind of sitting like this for 30, 40 minutes is not going to be great. And then as soon as you move, the breast moves in the baby's mouth, which again isn't ideal. So get yourself comfortable first, bring the baby onto the breast, to the breast, and then we just keep them nice and secure. If you're in a position like this, I would suggest letting them get established in the feed before thinking about moving any arms or shifting position or anything like that. It just sometimes, if they're not really, if the milk isn't flowing yet, they can come off and slip a little bit. So there's lots, that's what we're looking for in a mother-led position, and that's what we want to achieve when we're attaching the baby. And there's lots of different ways that you can do that. One way is called the cross cradle, and that's the one that you've kind of seen me demonstrating. So we think about hugging a boob, arms either side, holding the baby right around me. Quite possibly they'll fit onto your forearm like this if they're newborn, further into the middle of your body than you think they need to be. If you have them all the way over this side, what you find is that their heads are curling in towards you, and you'll get the nose really tucked into the breast, and you won't get such a nice deep latch. Whereas if we move them a bit more centrally so that they really have to tilt their head back and reach up for that nipple, we can get a nice deep attachment going on. So this is the cross cradle. If you find that the nose is tucked in, then probably just shift them a little bit further over or bring their bums in a little bit closer and sort of freeze up that head a bit. So that's what we call a cross cradle. Another position which looks very similar is a cradle position, cradle hold. You can see with the cross cradle, it's opposite arm to breast. That way we've got a really good kind of control of the baby's head, so that we're going to be able to get them on, get them in the right position and get them on nice and efficiently. If we're looking at a cradle position, it's quite hard with a newborn when you're first starting to latch them, because you can see already the temptation is to bring the baby a lot further this way. And like I've just said, that's not going to give you a deep attachment. It's harder to get them into the right place. You feel like you're twisting around a little bit. And it's also possible that the arm might block the head from tilting back. So I wouldn't really recommend a cradle hold until things have really settled down. Another really useful position is what we call the rugby hold, or the underarm hold, which is essentially the same basic hold as the cross cradle, but it's under your arm instead. So we're just holding the baby in the same way and sliding them round back behind me. We're still hugging a boob, one arm either side, because if it was in the middle, then it's pushing the baby away and we're going to lose our C, the closeness between you. So hugging a boob, getting them right in. I use my fake breasts here. Again, sticking that nipple up the nose to help us with the position, waiting for the head back, bringing them round and on. So that would be the rugby hold. Really tucked around behind me there. If you're finding that there's not enough space behind you, you can just turn your body slightly, and that gives you a bit more room, kind of tucked up behind you there. Or you can pop a cushion behind half of your back. That sometimes also gives you a little bit of space. But that can be a great position if you've got quite large breasts and you're struggling to get them to attach. And also if you've had a C-section, sometimes it can give you a good view of the baby, nice eye contact again. And sometimes it's easier to see when they're ready to bring on. So that's the rugby hold. Another very, very useful hold, especially in the early days, is a side lying position. I'm quite often found on the floor in people's houses demonstrating this. I'm actually not going to do that today, but we'll see if I can give you the idea. So with the side lying, you'd be lying on your side on the bed. And so you're lying on your side on the bed. The baby is also lying on their side on the bed. You're just going to have to use your imagination. You position them slightly underneath the breast so that, again, they're going to reach up, tilt that head back, reach up and attach on. And this hand is just keeping them against you lightly on their side. Some babies really like this position if they've felt a little bit manhandled. So for some babies, they find this a little bit too much contact if they're feeling quite sensitive, and the side lying position is kind of a happy medium between a mother-led and a baby-led position. So you're letting them almost attach themselves and you're just keeping them there. It's a super position at night if you're very sleepy and you're worried you're going to fall asleep, because we don't want you falling asleep in a chair in one of these positions, really. So if you are feeling very, very sleepy, get someone to watch you if you can. But that sideline position in the bed is one of the safest positions to feed in that situation. So yeah, I think that's it. But it's very much about looking at your body. It might be worth doing that during pregnancy. Just have a look at where your nipples are. Because if your nipples are really round this, quite pointing out the side or pointing down quite a lot, it doesn't make a lot of sense to come from this direction. And it would make a lot more sense to come from that sort of direction. So really look at where you are. What we don't want to do is move the breast, get them attached, and then, because as soon as you let go, it's going to go back to where it was anyway. So you might as well work with what you've got and get a good position. There's loads of support in all of the areas that this is going out to. So get help from your midwives, your health visitors, and the local breastfeeding teams, all sorts of places you can get support, IBCLCs obviously as well. So lots of support out there to give you a hand to get those right, but just have a play and a bit of a practice. I think there were a couple of questions on this. Yeah, there was a lady who, it was an anonymous one. She wants to breastfeed the fourth baby. She's got really large breasts and is worried about getting the latch right. Yeah, different size breasts. That's what we've just been talking about, your personal geography. It makes a big difference what size breasts you've got and that kind of thing. So if you've got really, really large pendulous breasts, that baby-led position might be a really good one, but you might need to be just a little bit more laid back. So you can see that as I laid back more, my breasts started coming away from my body. So that might just help the access to the nipple. You can also use like a rolled up muslin just to pop underneath, and sometimes that can bring the breast up. Or with very large pendulous breasts, sometimes a nice soft scarf, not a woolly winter one, but a nice soft scarf coming underneath and kind of making a bit of a sling for the breast can really help. But yeah, lots of good positions, and it's just experimenting. Your boobs are 360 degrees, just got to work out the best angle to come from, and it can work. We've got Emily, who's a first-time mum. Hi, Emily. Congratulations. How do you know when to switch breasts? Excellent question. Right, so we talk about popping them on one breast, letting them finish it. And then if they need it, we would swap over onto the other side. In the past, we would talk about giving them 10 minutes per breast and all that kind of thing. What we know now about how the body produces milk and how it works, and the way the babies feed, we know that we need to be much more following the lead of the baby and following the lead of your baby, of your breasts. Everybody's boobs make milk in a slightly different way in terms of the amount they make at one time, different storage capacity that we talked about last week. So you just have to go along with the baby and trust that your baby will ask for what they need and that your body will respond to that and give them what they need. But as a kind of a rule of thumb, let them on one breast, whatever position you want to use. I'm going to go for a baby leg position. So pop them onto one breast, wait until they fall asleep and come off themselves. Maybe give them a little bit of a cuddle. And then if they do wake up and start wriggling and wanting some more, you can just pop them down onto the other side and let them have a bit of a top up from that side. And then the next time, the next feed, you might start again on this one that had only had a little bit of a feed and finish off on that breast. But some babies will only ever take one breast per feed, and others will take two. If we want to help you increase your milk, we might even suggest that you switch breasts even more times than that during a feed. So yeah, there's no kind of fixed rule. We kind of go along with what's going on. Lisa was asking about feeding pillow recommendations. I've got one here. So this is just a simple V-shaped pillow. And essentially, you don't need them at all. There's no need for a breastfeeding pillow. You can use what you've got around the house, a bed pillow or cushions from the sofa. Anything like that will work absolutely fine. But yeah, you can get made products. What I would say with those is, they're not necessary if you're really looking at a baby-led approach. They probably just get in the way. But if you're looking at a more mother-led position, what I would suggest is getting yourself comfortable, attaching the baby really well, and then using your cushion to pad out around where the baby is. So that way you're getting them in a good place and supporting that position, rather than getting, what I see sometimes is people popping the cushions around them, putting the baby onto the cushion, and then bringing themselves to where the baby is, which, remember, isn't ideal, and the baby may not be able to tilt their head back. The cushions are designed generically. They're not designed for the exact height of your body and your breasts. So much better to get the baby on first, get yourself comfy, get the baby on first, and then use some cushions or something just to prop them up. I hope that helps. Okay, I think that was all I wanted to say really about the positioning, but if you have got any questions, stick them on and I'll either answer them at the end, or we can stick it on next week's session as well. Right, so the next part we're going to look at is when to feed the baby and how you know when they need a feed. I'm going to share my screen for this one. All right, so hopefully you can see that. I'll just adjust that up a bit more because you don't need to see what I'm doing anymore. All right, so we can categorize mammals, because obviously we're mammals, and we can categorize them in one way as to how they look after their young. So we've got cash mammals who stick them under a bush or something like that and come back to them very occasionally. Then you've got follow mammals where the babies come along with the herd. You've got nests where you have the nest of young, but the mum or the parents come back to them fairly regularly. And then you have carry mammals where the babies are carried constantly by the parents. So with cash mammals, they may only be coming back every sort of 12 hours or so. So the milk for those mammals needs to be really high in protein and fat to keep them going in those long spaces. For a follow mammal, where they've got to pretty quickly be up and moving and going along with the herd, we're going to need a milk which is quite high in energy, aren't we? With the nesting one, where they're coming back fairly frequently, it's going to be a bit lower in protein and fat than say the cash mammals are. And with the carry mammal, where it's there all the time and not expending a lot of energy, we can afford to have a very easily digested milk that's quite low in protein and certain fats as well. So where are we? I think you might be able to figure this out by the choice of animals, but we are evolutionarily carry mammals. So we have evolved, and our babies have evolved to be with us, close to us, carried by us 24/7, and not to have that gap. And our milk and our babies' digestive systems have evolved for that as well. So our milk is very easily digested, and it's not particularly high in energy because they can come back frequently to it, and it's a little bit lower in protein. And again, the baby's digestive system can cope better with milks which are low in protein. We need a certain amount of some kinds of quite high levels of some kind of fat because of the enormous amount of brain development that we do. But that gives you a little bit of an insight into baby behavior, especially in the early days, but the first couple of years. They aren't fully developed when they come out. We are one of the most immature of all mammal species when we're born, because simply if our brain was fully developed when we came out, they wouldn't fit. It's hard enough as it is, isn't it? And so we've got a lot of development, a lot of brain development to happen. And for that brain development to happen, we need the baby to be in a safe, where it feels safe, so the oxytocin can flow and those memories and those brain connections can flourish. So that's where the idea of kind of responsive parenting has come from, and responsive feeding as well. So we want to keep the babies as close to us as we can for as much time as possible. That's what the babies kind of expect. Now, obviously that doesn't fit very well with our Western cultures in a way, and the way that we like to live. I think we'd be much more comfortable towards the nesting side, wouldn't we? But our babies are very much carry mammals. So I think it helps to know what they expect of us, and so that we can get as close to that as we can in our family situations. We're never going to be perfect, and that's okay, but at least you know what we're kind of aiming towards, and you can understand a little bit how they why they react the way they do to certain things. So yeah, we've got a baby who wants to be held and carried, and who wants frequent access to the breast for for short, frequent feeding. So we talk about a minimum of 8 feeds in 24 hours, and that's an absolute minimum. If you spread that out equally, that's roughly 3 hours from the start of one feed to the start of the next, which you might have heard, but you're never going to get that. I very rarely see a baby who goes 3 hours between feeds like that. It's much more likely you're going to have 10, 12, 14, 16 feeds in 24 hours. That's much more likely. And that they're not going to be equally spaced. You'll have some closer together, some further apart. A bit like us. We're not going to, sometimes we want a quick drink, sometimes we want a 3-course meal. We don't eat and drink for the same amount of time every day. So why do we expect that of babies? So yeah, we just follow their lead. We know that, again, the storage capacity of the breasts vary between women. So for some women, they're going to need to feed more frequently, and others will be able to go a little bit longer. But over 24 hours, the babies will get the same, as long as we are responsive and we don't start restricting what's going on. I don't know how much of a gap that was and if I'm actually there. I'm assuming I'm still with you. I'm sorry, we had a bit of an internet outage. Let me get back to where I was. We were talking about mammals and responsive feeding. Here we go. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, wake them if needed. And the length of feeds is something else that we get asked quite a lot. And a normal feed can be anywhere between 5 and 40 minutes, which isn't very helpful, is it? But we just have to follow their leads. They're feeding for many different reasons, as we'll discuss in a second. So we just follow how long they need to feed for and don't worry about it. The only exception to that is if you're having lots of very, very short feeds or lots of very long feeds over a period of time, in which case get a bit of support just to have a watch of those feeds, make sure that they're being effective, make sure that they're effective feeds, because it could be that we could just do a little bit of an adjustment, a little bit of a tweak, and get those feeds a little bit less hard work for both of you. So the feeding cues, how do you tell whether a baby wants to go to the breast? There are lots of different feeding cues, and they're kind of on a continuum. They start quite subtle, and then they get more and more overt until you get right down to the bottom when they're just getting so cross and frantic and might turn red and crying. And to be honest, I wouldn't class those last couple of ones as feeding cues as such. I would think of those more of, we've gone slightly beyond, oops. Hopefully we can get them in there a bit quicker, because when a baby's crying, the tongue lifts right up in their mouths, and when that tongue is lifted high in the mouth, it's hard to get a boob in there. So in those situations, I'd probably give them a little bit of a cuddle, a bit of a stroke, calm everything down, and then try to attach again. All right, but the quicker that you can get to their cues, the easier. Because they'll have a little bit more patience with learning to get on and all that sort of thing. In the very early days, basically, if they're awake, they probably want to go to the breast. And you can't overfeed a fully breastfed baby. So if in doubt, whip it out, see whether they want to go on, and then you'll know whether that was it or not. Okay, so they're the basic feeding cues, but you start to learn your own baby and their kind of rhythm, and you can build up a bit of a dialogue between you. So I talked a bit about, and I've kind of hinted that it's not all about food and drink, that there's many different reasons why a baby will go to the breast. Your breast is their safe place. It's the place where they go to feel connected to you and safe from harm. If they're away from their caregivers, they're going to be in an increase of stress, and they've probably gone into either the kind of into a defense mechanism in their body, where they're either going to protest quite loudly or they're going to sort of go very, very quiet and stop responding to try and hide away. But when they're with you, and preferably on the boob, they feel very safe. That oxytocin is flowing, that allows the brain development to happen. So you can see from this screen here, there's so many reasons, and this is only scratching the surface, but these are some of the reasons why a baby might want to go to the breast, and they've got no way of expressing which one of these is going on at this particular moment. So, you know, they might only have fed 10 minutes ago, and you're like, oh, they can't be hungry again. Well, no, they might not be hungry, but they might just want to connect with you. They might be overwhelmed with everything they've learned during the day and just need to spend some time suckling. They might be feeling poorly or too hot. That's one I've missed. Too hot or too cold. And your breast will adapt to that and help them either warm up or cool down. All sorts of reasons. So we just need to trust they're not manipulating us. We're not creating a rod for our own backs. It's good for them, for us to respond to them, keep them close and let them feed whenever they need to, as much as physically possible. All right. So what do we expect in those very, very early days? Well, we'd firstly expect them to feed, as we've discussed, really frequently, really, really often. and they might demand to be fed and go to the breast, or occasionally with a sleepy baby, you may need to wake them in the very early days. There isn't a rule of thumb with that at all. The amount that they'll take will increase. So we talked about colostrum last week, those tiny quantities jam-packed with good things to help your baby get set up in those early days, and also full of important things for the bacteria to flourish within the baby. But the colostrum isn't essential for the baby's nutrition and fluid levels, because they've been plugged into your placenta and they've had plenty of fluid while they were in there. Obviously, we're talking full-term healthy babies here. So it's not particularly essential for your baby from that point of view, but for the bacteria, getting their immune system set up, really important. And those small quantities in those first couple of days allow them to get used to feeding and breathing at the same time as sucking and swallowing. They've got a nice pattern and a rhythm going on, and it's easier to learn to do that with small quantities rather than, you know, having a fire hydrant firing at you, which can be quite hard if you're just learning it. So the very early days, very small quantities, you know, kind of teaspoon quantity on the first day, and then increasing quite quickly to sort of day 5. You're looking kind of golf ball, and it goes up from there. So we do expect those quantities to increase quite a lot. That milk change, what you might hear referred to as the milk coming in, or your milk changing from the colostrum to the more mature milk, that's kicked off by the delivery of the placenta. So when that's gone, that allows the prolactin to appear, and that more copious milk starts to come in. Then that change begins to happen. I think it's helpful to think about it once your body has got the message that the baby's here and it's arrived and it's well and it's alive and needs feeding. You know, we're giving our bodies that message, and then it goes, okay, let's switch over and crack on with larger quantities of milk. So you'll see a change from that thick colostrum to a more watery looking, a lighter coloured fluid within those sort of first 5 days-ish. Some babies are very sleepy after birth, you know, could be a medicated birth or something like that, and those ones we keep a little bit of a closer eye on, and we want to try and help them to feed. They may only take it, if you're expressing a bit, take it from your finger or just lick it off the breast rather than really properly attaching. So a baby who has gone on in the first hour and had a really good feed, and then maybe another feed fairly shortly after that, might then sleep for quite a long stretch, and that would be totally fine. Whereas a baby who hasn't been feeding very well, we would want to keep that kind of trickling over and that in skin to skin, frequent access to the breast, and keep feeding that baby little and often to try and help them recover a little bit. So sometimes with sleepy babies, we really will need to give them a little bit more support. So talk to your midwives about that, and you get lots of support in the hospital and things. It's normal for babies, as we've discussed, to need contact with you and to feel safe when they're with you. So keep them as close as you can as much of the time as possible. If you're feeling really sleepy and need to rest, that's absolutely fine. Just make sure you've got someone keeping an eye on both of you, and while you're resting and dozing, make sure that baby can obviously breathe and isn't going to fall off or do anything like that. So when your breasts and that milk is changing, that's kind of reflected in how your breasts feel as well. So they may still feel fairly soft to start with, and then round about when this milk is changing, they may start to feel much fuller, much firmer, and kind of head to almost engorged, where they're really solid and tight and shiny and hot and red and very uncomfortable. We don't want to get into that position. If they're too full, then some of those tubes are going to start getting constricted or maybe blocked, and then the milk doesn't flow as well. So if you're starting to feel really full and uncomfortable, either wake the baby up, see if they will help you out, take a bit off, make you more comfortable, or just hand express a little bit until you're comfortable again. Something else that sometimes helps in those early days is something called reverse pressure softening, where you take your hand in a bit of a crab claw and almost push and hold that tissue back for sort of 30 seconds and release, and then do it again, 30 seconds and release. And that can push back some of that swollen, it's not all milk, some of it's other fluids, lymph fluids and things, pushing that back into the breast. It can help the nipple to point out a little bit. It's hard in like a mother-led position, particularly for babies to get a good deep hold of a very full breast. So imagine a balloon that's really full. You couldn't get a big mouthful of it. It'd be really difficult. So again, expressing a little bit until it's a little bit softer before the baby goes on and tries to feed might help you. In response to this increase in milk, we expect the poo to change too. So in the first sort of certainly the first 24 hours, maybe the first couple of days, we have very thick, black, tarry, sticky, treacly poo, impossible to get off. Try and get rid of those if you can. So pass them on to someone else to clean up. You've got enough to think of. And so, yeah, really thick, black meconium poos. Once they start having that milk intake, that stool starts to change and it goes much lighter, a bit more liquidy, green, kind of goes greeny, maybe slightly bitty, kind of think pesto type thing, just where it's just starting to loosen off. And then by about day 5, we'd expect it to be changing to a much looser kind of curry sauce, korma type thing. Might still be quite seedy, but we're looking for that at about day 5. And if we get that, it's a really good sign that that milk change has happened and that the baby's having a good intake. Apart from on the first day, we're looking for at least 2 good big stools, big poos every day. If we're not getting that, please get some help with the feeding, get someone just to watch what's going on. That's a very strong sign that the baby's maybe not getting quite enough milk. So in the early days, the poo is the real key indicator. Your wee should be nice and light coloured, not strong smelling, doesn't look very concentrated, and should be in increasing amounts. So on day 1, at least 1 wee, day 2, at least 2 wees, day 3, at least 3 wees, blah, 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 going up to day 5 and day 6. And then we'd look for at least 6 good wet nappies every 24 hours. So also around this time, hormones are changing quite a lot. So the hormones after birth will be settling, and sometimes that can really hit, well, I would say your mental health, but your mental well-being. You can feel quite insecure, a little bit off balance, quite emotional. It's quite normal for people to be teary. Not everybody experiences it, but around this stage, be quite teary and sensitive. It's a phase and it will pass. If it doesn't pass, talk to your midwife or your GP and get some support with that, because it's not normal for it to continue, but it is normal to have a period, a short period where that's the case. And we talked about the milk making hormones going on. We need to keep that prolactin level high, so we're creating more milk, so making sure that you're feeding at night and just keeping that milk flowing. Infants sleep in short periods. You can tell that by the number of feeds that they have. You know, we were talking about fitting in 12, 14, 16 feeds in 24 hours. So you can tell that the time in between that is going to be quite short. You know, hour and a half, 2.5 hours. An hour and a half is certainly not uncommon for newborns. And that light sleep is part of it. Is part of what helps keep them safe. So we want to support that as much as we can, and not kind of stuff them full of heavy, difficult to digest things to make them sleep deeper, because their safety mechanisms might be overridden then. So we try and support this light sleep. It's good for the baby, it's good for you. It's hard to deal with, but it is possible and it will pass. And you tend to find that it goes in phases. So you'll have a really intense phase where it seems like the baby's feeding all the time and won't sleep and just needs you a lot. And then it will settle down into much more of a rhythm again, and the feeds will space out and it'll all seem much easier. And then it'll ramp up again. And that happens around times when either they're learning something new or they're growing, that kind of thing. Gosh, I could talk for hours on all of this. I'm aware that time's ticking on. So any questions, let me know. We can always talk about it next week as well. There was another couple of questions. So there's a question from Gemma about whether it was safe for baby to share her bed. Your midwife and your health visitor will talk to you lots about safe sleep guidance. There's some very good websites, the Basis infant sleep website, I'll pop a link to that as well, where you can get really good information about normal infant sleep, what it looks like, how we encourage you to be responsive and not do sleep training, that kind of thing, where babies should sleep and how to help protect them. It's normal and very common to share a bed occasionally, even in the UK and certainly in a lot of cultures, but we need to be very aware of how to make that safer and what our personal risk factors are. So things like, does anyone in the family smoke? Are you taking any drugs or medications that make you sleepy? Things like that can really increase your risks. By breastfeeding exclusively for at least 2 months, we know that that halves the risks to babies from SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, or cot death. So that's a very useful thing, a really important thing that you can do to help keep your baby safe. But yeah, have a look at that. You could maybe have a look at things like a sidecar cot, that kind of thing, which is kind of somewhere in the middle. But yeah, we know that babies are safest sleeping on their back in the same room as their caregivers in a cot. But there are all sorts of different options and ways that different families deal with the situation, depending on their risk factors. So do talk to your midwife about your personal family situation and come up with a plan. And don't beat yourself up if you are in that situation. Just make sure you do it safely. And then Rachel asked, do I need to wind my baby? And theoretically, a breastfed baby who's attaching really well, theoretically doesn't need winding at all. Well, some of them you find that they do and they need a bit of help, but generally what I would suggest is feed the baby first, then give them a nice cuddle afterwards. Just relax. You don't need to kind of prop them up and give them a pat. That's probably going to wake them up and you don't want, and then they'll want to feed to sleep again. So just give them a nice cuddle up against your body, pop them in a sling in the daytime, move around. That's effectively giving them a bit of a tummy massage. So yeah, just try and see if they can bring it up themselves first. If they're squirmy and uncomfortable, of course, help them along. So I think that's the lot from me today. You're probably saying thank goodness. But thank you very much for joining me, and I shall see you next week. Let me finish that and remember how to finish this. All right, bye guys, nice to see you.